Good evening, Inez. Matthew, I'm your host for today.
Excellent.
Could you just explain a little bit what is it that you do, and what background do you come from?
Certainly. So I'm managing director of a small business consultancy called Data Understood. We basically help organisations get the most value out of their data. So this is quite a wide statement, but I tend to boil it down into either making operational efficiencies, so helping to have a better work-life balance in your organisation. It can be better understanding your customers through data, or it can be actually generating completely new products. So we work with organisations that understand that data can be used to develop new solutions and new technology, but they don't necessarily have the data skills to actually make that happen. So we come in and we'll build a model to enable them to do that.
So you teach them data skills, basically.
A little bit. So sometimes it can actually be trading, but in other times it'll just be a case of, we need a predictive model to do X, can you build a predictive model? And they don't necessarily need to know how it works, we just put it in place for them.
That's great. So you said that you were working with businesses, and have you helped many individual entrepreneurs or startups?
Yes, so we've helped a few individual entrepreneurs to create their own products. So we've worked primarily in the insurance tech area for creating insurance solutions. That could be anything from finding customers and showing them solutions more appropriately. But in our most recent adventure with an insurtech company, it was enabling them to grow. So they basically had a solution that was unable to scale. So we applied automation and algorithms to help them scale that much more effectively.
I guess everything relies on certain algorithms. And how can an entrepreneur use data to understand what his business goal should be like?
Gosh, that's a big question. So I am a massive data advocate. Obviously, I'm an applied statistician. I see the value that data can bring. But when you're considering a company and starting a company, you're primarily wanting to know who your customers are, and trying to get a better grip on what they need. So there's various ways in which you can do this using data that's available. So one of the things that I tend to look at is where the role of qualitative data, so actually speaking to people, and where the role of quantitative data, so numbers and figures that are on spreadsheets, how those two things can come together. So it can be literally speaking to your customers to find out what they need, or it can be researching more about their organisations. So in the UK, we're really fortunate. We have Companies House, which is a registration of every limited company that exists in the UK. You can extract that data, you can look up what that company does, so things like their SIC codes, and get a better idea of how many people are potentially in your market. So there's many ways that you can use data to get an idea of a business base, but you can also work with partners like Experian, so like the credit card company. They provide access to their data so that you can get to an idea of customers' purchasing behaviours. So that's generally where I start on looking at.
So you basically get other people's credit card data, and then you see what they spend their money on, and you help businesses.
Somewhat. So Experian summarise their credit card information into customer segments, so you can start to look at where your customers fit into those segments, and that can be based on postcode or email address and things like that.
That's interesting. So, yeah, you said that you were a statistician as well.
Yes.
So you've obviously had a lot of experience with working with different kinds of data. So would you say that coding and technical experience does it play a very important role in analyzing data in general?
It depends what your role is within data. So nowadays, it used to be that data science was effectively the big thing that everybody who was looking for a data person would want a data scientist. That put a lot of pressure on one role and made it very, very big. So we expected one individual to be able to do absolutely everything, which is not feasible. So now within data, we've got basically three different types of people. We've got the data practitioners, which is what you're talking about, the coders that
Yeah.
build algorithms. Then we've got the data strategists who are thinking about, basically, I imagine you guys are thinking about the entrepreneurial side of things. So they're thinking about, how do we actually fit this with our business outcomes? What do we want data to do? And then you've got translators in the middle. So they translate what the strategists want to the engineers and then the practitioners. And likewise, they translate the results that the practitioners produce to the engineers. So you don't have to necessarily be a coder these days to work in data now.
So if you don't want to be a coder, you need to be more of a data practitioner? Or
Well, more of a translator or a
Translator.
storyteller. So that's, being able to interpret graphs and being able to paint a picture of what they...
what kind of story
Yeah.
the data is trying to tell us.
Exactly.
Interesting. So basically, it is all about noticing patterns, even if you don't have any computer skills. If you can just see the pattern that the data is trying to convey to you, then you can succeed. That's interesting. How can an entrepreneur aim to identify opportunities to grow, optimize, and improve one organization's business process by using data in the data-driven world where data is basically everywhere and everyone is overloaded with data?
Yes. So there are two sides to that. I think people think that data provides all the answers, including how to potentially make money out of completely thin air. I hate to break it to you guys, but that's not really what data can do. You kind of have to have an idea first and then see where data can fit into that idea. With regards to companies that are starting out, if you speak to a data person like myself, we can often see opportunities that you can have based on your initial idea. And generally that's where someone like myself will come in, speak to you, find out what your current situation is, what your desired situation is, and then I can map how you can use data and technology to make that journey happen.
Or completely reject someone's idea, say that data suggests otherwise.
I tend not to do that. That's a very rare occurrence, but yeah, sometimes.
So I guess my next question would be, if large quantities of data, would it guarantee one greater success in business?
I don't think so. Just because you've got lots and lots of data doesn't mean that you've got lots of valuable data. You can have lots of garbage, to put it mildly. You have to make sure that your data is appropriate for the task that you're using it for, and it contains useful, actionable information. So sometimes a small data set can be more valuable than a massive data set. The difference is people focus on big volumes of data because you can apply more interesting AI algorithms to them, but that's not necessarily a useful thing. So yeah, not everything's about the size of data that you've got, it's more about its quality. Yeah.
So do you think that big data is the next big thing, or is it just a trend?
So there's a hype about big data that's been present for the last, I would say, 5 years. It's primarily been a hype because we've never been able to do this before. We didn't have the technology to allow us to collect that amount of data before, and we didn't have the tools to analyse that amount of data before. So of course this has become a massive buzz around this area. It can provide us with a lot of useful information, but it's very difficult to collect a lot of information and a lot of data, which is why it tends to fall into the hands of big organisations that are got massive customer bases that can enable that. It can be quite difficult as a startup to get huge volumes of data. But I always start with, no matter how much data you've got, I would look at it. So try and visualize your data using a business intelligence platform so that you can see what you've got. Try and understand what that data is telling you and figure out how to act on it. And that's really where the value of data can come from, whether it's big or small. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So if you collect the correct data, no matter how much of it you have, it has to be reliable and prompt you to certain action.
Exactly.
So if we're looking at data as a motivator for action, how would you prevent biases coming into your data and filtering out prejudice and biases from the data set?
That's a very difficult thing to consciously achieve, but you try and make it so that you're aware of where those biases might be coming from. So if, say for example, you've got a method of collecting customer feedback, but you're doing it via a particular application and it's only running on certain phones, of course that's going to be a bias sample because you're prohibiting certain individuals from accessing that feedback survey. So you want to try and make it as accessible as possible. And thinking about how you can make digital technology accessible covers how you might interact with people that are potentially colourblind or have visual impairments or have mobility or dexterity issues. So trying to make things as accessible as possible reduces the areas where bias can come into. And what you're trying to achieve is create a sample which represents your population of interest. So if you have a good idea of who you're actually wanting to target, say for example it was students that you were wanting to explore, then you would have an idea of what that student demographic should look like and compare that against what your sample demographic is to determine if there's any biases coming out. Social media platforms have locked down on the amount of data that they can give you because they've improved their data privacy, which is a good thing. This is one of the aspects that I heavily promote to my customers. Is it tends to be that the most valuable data that the customer has is data that they already own. So it's data that they're using within their own software for management. It can be looking at their CRM systems or their project management systems or things like that. That is really useful and insightful information. A lot of people think that they have to go externally to find useful information, but a lot of the time it comes from within. You can of course try and find data that's available in the public domain, but you have to have a good reason for accessing it, and all the individuals that are providing you with that data need to have given permission for you to use the data in the way that you're wanting to, which is why it's making it a little bit more complicated to necessarily find data and just use it for your own purposes.
Yeah, GDPR and consent and everything.
Yes.
So I guess it comes down to the skills that one, let's say in our case, an entrepreneur possesses in gathering data. So what skills do you think are the most valuable in working and being able to make sense of data and collect it as well?
I think it's being able to ask the right question most of the time. So if you know that you're trying to build a solution that is focused on providing a particular offering to meet a need, then it's how do you collect information that best assess whether or not your solution is meeting that need or not. So you've all heard about minimal viable products and putting those into the market. It can be as simple as surveying individuals, but a better way is finding out if people are actually buying your offering. If there's less interest, then that's a good indication that potentially it's not the thing that's really driving them to pick up your solution. So it's start small, ask the right question, gather data as easily as possible, even if it literally is just sales figures, and work from that so that you've got an experiment that you can test new things against and see if that actually improves your outcomes.
Okay, so and when testing solutions, what kind of primary or secondary data should the entrepreneur focus on?
So I'm guessing all of you have heard of A/B tests? No?
A/B tests, I haven't. No.
Yes, one of you has.
Something.
Excellent. I'm very happy to hear that. That's so. On websites, it's very easy to do A/B tests because you basically split the people that are coming to your website, so you can show half the population one website and the other half of the people that are showing it the other website, and then you can compare and contrast the effectiveness of that change.
Interesting.
So that enables you to know if
So you see how many people are more likely to stay for longer on your website,
or
and
click through to purchase. Yeah.
Interesting.
So a simple thing. I wish I could take credit for this, but it was actually my brother-in-law that noticed this. changing an image on a travel website so that Mickey was literally pointing at the purchase a holiday button, bumped up the number of people that were going through to buy holidays to go and see Disney World.
People were given a literal call to action.
Exactly.
Right? The marketing terms.
Mickey Mouse pointing at the button was enough to promote people to do that. So you can use data to illustrate where potential changes are having a good impact.
So yeah, data-driven decisions they seem to be very complementary to people's success. And talking about success, how would you now define success, that you've been in the business for so long?
Oh gosh, for me, success is knowing that you've helped another organisation to meet their goals and potentially make the work environment for their people and their customers a bit better. A lot of the time I'm met with organisations that are really frustrated or are working every single hour of the day and they're really passionate, so much so that we had one organisation that was concerned because they knew that their employees were working over the weekend to meet demand and they couldn't scale any further. So a massive thing that makes me feel really happy is being able to help customers get a little bit of their life back by automating the stuff that they don't need to be doing. So that's what I classify as success, is helping other organisations.
And so the more organizations and the more people you help, the more kind of success you believe it drives.
That's the hope anyway.
So you graduated from St. Andrews University, right? Was
Yes.
it in 2000?
So I first went there to study theoretical physics and graduated in 2006. It turns out that the demand for theoretical physicists is very niche. So I was very determined to try and get work. I applied for 69 jobs and I think I got 3 interviews and realised that this was not going to be easy. So I then started to push out to all my contacts to see if anyone would employ me, because it was quite clear that I was unemployable. And thankfully, one of my mother's friends was looking for help. I joined their company literally to shadow their PA, because by this time I was thinking I'm going to go into administration. And it just completely by chance, their psychometrician was late on providing information. And he turned around to me and said, "You've got a background in numbers, could you look at this?" And 4 years later I was running their research team and I'd got a stats degree to finally figure out what he meant by look at psychometrics. But it was definitely not planned, and it turned out that statistics is a very called for profession these days. But yes, I went back to St Andrews to do applied statistics and data mining, because data mining was the name for data science, because I'm that old. Data science wasn't a term that was used that frequently, and kind of started a career as a data scientist quite late. That's
Well, better late than never, right, as they say. But you mentioned that you were helping to quantify and assess data from psychometric tests.
Yes.
Right, a lot of companies employ those when taking on new employees. How effective do you think they are? Do you think the data is conclusive on the psychometrics test?
So I was the biggest skeptic
of the
of
psychometric
this,
test.
yeah, which I think is partly why they wanted me to look at their psychometrics, because I was very
The critical
much,
eye.
Yes, I was very much trying to make them show that they didn't work. And surprisingly enough, it opened my eyes to how useful they can be. So the organisation that I worked with tried to help individuals understand themselves so that they could understand others better. And part of the research that I was looking at was to make sure that the understanding of self wasn't what is known as the Barnum effect. So P.T. Barnum would basically go to individuals and tell them about their lives, but they would do it in a very generic way. So everybody thought that it described them purely because it was so generic.
It's like astrology.
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to stay well away from that, but yes, effectively like that. So what I did was I did a blind study. People would get 3 profiles.
Yeah.
one was related to them, the other two were completely random, and asked them to basically read through and say how many sentences are really like me and how many are really not. And there was a statistically significant difference between people identifying that their one was truthfully theirs.
0.1%.
No, well, substantial as well.
Substantial. Okay.
A substantial difference, but that's a very good point to clear up. But
that's interesting. Yeah, I guess knowledge of yourself and other people really helps you to avoid certain conflicts and understand why you have conflicts at work. It's like MBTI. That's the kind of
very similar. Yeah, that's it. But in your field of entrepreneurial skills, it's really important to be able to adapt to your customers. So within Insights, we always had this phrase, it's not treat people how you would like to be treated, it's treat people how they would like to be treated. So being able to identify personality traits and try and meet their needs is a much required factor, I think, from business people.
So data kind of can help you understand that as well.
Yes, definitely. So if you know, for example, that your customers are not engaging with you on a certain platform, stop using that platform. Use one that does. That's yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I guess that if you have different, you should always put yourself, I guess, on different platforms and then collect data from as many as you can. But So do you think that data will be treated as commodity in the upcoming time?
That's a big question. So I think the good thing is that people are becoming more aware of how valuable their own data is. Organizations are starting up to try and commercialize that so that basically you can charge companies to see your data. I don't know how far that will actually become, mostly because humans are lazy. We are very, very quick to opt in to handing over our data if we get what we want faster. So if you make your application difficult unless you provide permission, then of course you're going to collect more data, but slightly unethically. But yes, I think already you can see, so companies like Experian have commoditized data. They charge a fee for getting access to this. I'm curious to see how the evolution of GDPR either heightens that or makes that so difficult that it becomes impossible to commercialize
data.
Well, personal information. We're definitely going to commercialize non-personalized information, because that's already kind of happening in the marketplace, but it's an interesting one to keep track of.
Yeah, this is interesting because a lot of companies, they keep a very big variety of different data. There was, for example, recently a giant leak with a company, I think that was called Biofield or something. I'm not sure. They were basically in charge of giving access to a lot of like banks and governmental buildings. Had loads of face recognition data of different people, and that all got leaked. So, do you think that companies are do you think that they should be allowed to keep and store customers' data, or should there be some kind of more policy regarding that?
So there are already information security guidelines for how you retain information. You have to have a reason for retaining that information. So unless you're able to properly describe why you need to keep hold of that, you shouldn't really be retaining that data. A massive area that I think is becoming bigger for all organizations is data governance.
Yeah.
So this is looking at how do we make sure that our customers' data is secure so that something like that doesn't happen, because that is a massive leak and really problematic. So encryption, at-rest encryption and transfer, all of these things need to be made sure that they're embedded in organizations and that you're keeping data with the right permissions and the right structure around it. So only people that should be able to access the data can access the data. So this is actually becoming a big area that our customers are requesting us to help them with, which is how do we improve our data governance.
Yeah, because I guess no company wants to have a big scandal that they lost someone's data.
The Information Commissioner's Office will fine you for doing that, so there are financial penalties. Plus, your customers will leave you if you treat them badly, so you have to make sure that you're treating data as nicely as you would the end customer.
Yeah, just from the virtue of being online all the time and going to different websites, clicking this button, I accept the cookies and stuff. Do you try to leave as little of your personal data on the internet, knowing that there have been cases of data breaches and companies keeping your data unvisualized?
So I try and weigh up the value of providing my data versus the risk that I have for it being leaked. Mm-hmm. If it's likely that I can't see data privacy policies on their website or on their product, if they don't mention certain things, then it's unlikely that I'll deal with them. If they seem to have their act together, then there's part of me that's even more willing to provide them with my personal information, because I want them to provide me with a good service, and if I give them as much of knowledge about me as possible, then I know that they can do that. So one of the things that I found priceless is when I was in my 20s, I got an advertorial from a company that deals with retirees. Now that is not useful to me. It wasn't cost effective for them to send that to me. So it helps if you're both being truthful about who you are and what your aims are, so that you can marry up your activities appropriately.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. One of my probably few last questions is how could data help an entrepreneur to become more effective?
So there's two ways in which data can help you become more effective. One is, of course, looking at your operational efficiencies and your business processes and all that kind of stuff. But the other aspect is looking at data about how to optimize yourself. So we now have various different tools that help us have a better understanding of how much exercise we're getting, what food we're putting in our bodies to improve our behaviour. My latest thing that I'm testing is this little ring, which is tracking absolutely everything that I'm doing and sleeping right now. But it's that whole idea of you have to put the work into yourself as much as you do your business, and you can use data in both of these areas.
And how much would you say, percentage-wise, should one put work into himself and into his business that he's trying to create?
Oh,
there's a balance.
So if I knew that answer, I would.
You probably wouldn't be here.
I would be living. I would definitely tell you. I think you need to prioritise a lot on your own self-development, and I thoroughly recommend finding mentors and coaches to support you in developing your business ideas. So I would say it's 50-50. But at the same time, I know that I'm a workaholic and I don't sleep enough. So take that with a pinch of salt. That's it.
So how does your average workday look like?
It can be chaos a little bit of time. So it's very much, I will have meetings to discuss things with customers, try and make sure that they're actually getting out of me what they need.
Right, so could someone find some sources of data to realize what it is that he's actually should be doing, or where his heart lays?
Personally, I think that comes from within. Yeah, and it comes back to try things, get involved in as many things as you possibly can. I've been very fortunate that I've worked in industries, so as you've said, I've worked in psychometrics, I worked in epidemiology, I worked for a genealogy site, then a publishing site, then insurtech, and now my customers can be in the public sector, which is very different when you're working with individuals within the Home Office, like the NHS or environmental organisations. And you, by putting yourself in various different situations, you can all of a sudden find out what you love to do, what you find really interesting, and what might be less of an interest to you. So basically, go out, try and do everything. That's my advice. That's
Perfect. Yeah, I guess there's the only one way to experience it and just go straight. But yeah, there's one very famous figure. His name is Edward Snowden.
Oh,
He wrote the book called Permanent Record.
Yes.
And my question is it true that everything that you enter into the Google search bar, that Google stores it somewhere? Do you think it's true?
Well, it would be impossible to know unless we worked for Google, I would imagine.
Or the CIA?
Well, yeah, that's a very big question. But I think that they are likely to collect information regarding what you're putting in because it enables them to improve their search algorithms. The question is how long they retain that for. Now, given how many people use Google, you would need to have substantial storage to store absolutely everything. Now, they do, but I imagine that they don't retain it for that long because that would be very costly. If anybody looks into looking at storage of lots and lots of data over time, I think you'd realise that it's not cost effective.
Yeah. There are even theories that they have underwater bases where they keep the storage, like computers and everything.
Well, it makes sense because it's cooler there. So I worked for a data center company, and we had a data center. Well, they still do. I should mention, there's a data center in Dundee, and then there's a data center in Aberdeen. Aberdeen is a few miles north of Dundee, but it is much colder, and ergo much more efficient to run a data center in Aberdeen than it is in Dundee. So yeah, putting it in ice water would also be very efficient. There's logic to these things.
But yeah, let's not get too deep into conspiracy theories. I guess just one last question for me is, do you think that in order to become one's best self, should an individual keep some sort of a personal data record in terms of like a diary, like a productivity diary, or like a simple mood diary? Do you think that has potential to some sort
help
of
you?
yeah.
That's so I do, but I am the biggest nerd probably in the room. So
Don't know about that. We've got quite a lot of people in this room.
So I
the most successful nerds.
No. So I log all my time.
Yeah.
I have various devices that track what I'm doing during the day. The reason that I do it is primarily to try and optimize myself. So for example, I log the time that it takes me to do a particular project for an organization. I find out if I potentially massively undersold myself, and then it's a question of how do I actually make that better and productize that service so that I have a better return on investment for myself. But that only works if you're neurotic and willing to log all that information and read all that information. If you're not going to look at it, don't bother recording it because it's not going to have value. And if it takes you far too long to record the information, you limit the amount of the day that you actually have to do stuff. So what I'm saying is treat that in moderation, but yes, I find it very valuable.
That's great. Yeah, I guess coming back to the psychometrics, and so different people have different mindsets. Some people are more rational and some are more irrational. Intuitive. And I guess like when it comes to building goals, the approach to some would be to just make a bullet list of everything they want to do, and for others like plan day by day. So do you think that it's more efficient to when building your plan to add as many key points and like so you could just collect data better enough? Or
so it comes down to the individual. I think find what works best for you, and if you do have the opportunity to work with people that are not like you, grab hold of that with open arms, because as you're saying, different people will view the same situation in a different manner, and if you can come together and collaborate to create a goal that brings forth those more sense-driven people and those more intuitive people, those that are thinkers and feelers, then you'll have a much richer goal by trying to approach it from different sides. And you're right, someone will want it literally a one-line person, there's going to be a person that's going to have a 5-year plan and everything documented out, but that's not a bad thing to have it done in the way that meets what you need to get out of it. That's
Okay. Well, my last question would be simple. It's just, what pieces of advice would you give to your 20-year-old self, or when you were just graduating from university and just embarking on the business world path?
my biggest piece of advice to myself would be to not worry about where I was going. I was completely freaking out, thinking that I'd made a massive mistake with regards to my educational choices, that I was going down a road that was not going to be helpful, and I should have just relaxed. So I'm telling that to all of you just now. Don't worry about your decisions, just relax, go with the flow, and it'll work out. That's
That's a very great piece of advice. I really enjoyed asking those questions. I'm really sorry for the way I phrased them.
That's completely fine.
I'm not a data person by any span of imagination, but now it's an opportunity to give all of our guests a chance to ask their questions. Yeah.
So I have two questions. The first one was that Xperia dataset you were talking about. Is it just like a dataset online, or is it like an API?
So you basically can work with the organisation to find out the best method of collecting information, so that you can send them literally a CSV of the email of your customers, and they will send you it back with information that's matched. So I've mentioned Experian, but there are other companies that do a similar thing, or you can do API pools as well, but it's completely up to what your relationship is with the organisation.
Right, okay. And the second question is more of an open-ended one. It is, when you first co-founded Data Understood, did you ever get a feeling of imposter syndrome with your clients? Like you felt am I can I really provide the best service?
I have imposter syndrome right here. It's all the time. So literally a month ago, I was at a business club, and it was the first time that I'd been at this business club, and they asked me, what do you do? And I said I work for a data consultancy, because I didn't have the confidence to say I own a data consultancy. I had a problem saying those words. I don't know how to get over imposter syndrome. I wish I could tell you, but it's consistently there, and it's so difficult when you're selling something, because there's times where I will meet with a customer and I'll think I can provide a really good solution to them, and I know that I can help them. But I think it's also as valuable for me to turn around and say, I'm not the right person for you. You actually need this person, and I'll put you in touch with that person. So sometimes it's good to know when you're not the right one, providing you're not underselling yourself. That's
That's a very great observation, because I feel like with sales, a lot of the sales just depend on you having stupid confidence. Yeah. It's just, you have to just pretend that you know what you're talking about, and we'll optimize your business, sure, come on board. Yeah. And in reality, people who know their stuff and who have actually read books and stuff, because they say that if you read a book on a certain topic, you know more than 99% of other people. So that imposter syndrome is kind of inherent in knowing a lot of stuff, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
You've done a lot of stuff.
It's difficult, yeah.
Any more questions, guys?
I have a very funny question. As an entrepreneur, have you ever questioned yourself, or have you ever answered anyone that why you chose this name, Data Understood?
So
yeah.
I didn't actually choose this name. My business partner chose this name.
Okay.
That's so the benefit of having someone else involved made it easier. But we basically wanted a name that made it very clear what we did, and we wanted it to be something that made it very approachable. Mm-hmm. So we didn't want to come up with a name that potentially leaves people going, well, what on earth do they do? And the other thing that we were looking for is a domain that wasn't taken. I know it's a really simple thing, but that was it. So Data Understood became, we help people understand data. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's very underrated sometimes, but I think the name of the organization answers half of your service, answers half of the things, that what kind of a person you are, what kind of a personality you are as a co-founder. because I think it's very important to decide the logo and name of an organization, you know, because at later stage it speaks itself for the company. So yeah, that's why I wanted to know that. Yeah.
I agree with you. There's branding is really important.
Yeah.
We went under a rebrand 2 years into our offering. So I also would mention just act, like go, you can fix it further down the line. Our first logo was like two intersecting spheres that were like a Venn diagram, whereas now we've got a much brighter brand, and we thankfully have sufficient funds that we could hire someone to help us with that. At the beginning we did not. So yeah, what I'm basically saying is pick something but know that you can change it in the future. It doesn't have to be what you initially decide.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, how much data do you handle in the company? Because you said it's not big data. And do you see your company ending eventually dealing with big data? And I also want to ask, what kind of technology tools do you use to handle data?
Certainly. So within Data Understood, we actually have very little data stored on our platform, because if a customer's got data, we leave it with the customer and we tap into their data. So it can be, so I've done work with an organisation that deals with maritime data. So they literally have millions and millions of records that they were wanting analysed. But that never came across to our system because there was no need for it to come across to our system. So we use secure mechanisms of accessing our customers' data. So this can be setting up a VPN, virtual private network, and having a connection on that level, or it can be connecting to a remote computer so that we're accessing the data via this remote system. So effectively we're trying to keep the data as secure as possible and not transfer it unless we really, really have to, so it's keeping it on the customer system as much as possible. Tools that we use, I am most fluent in a programming language called R, which I'm guessing no one's probably heard of because it's a very old school type thing to program in.
I think a lot of students actually study art now as well here.
You have no idea how happy that makes me. So yeah, R is my bread and butter. That's what I will program in. Nowadays, lots of people are using Python, obviously, because that's become a much more approachable language for a lot of people. I primarily use business intelligence tools, and Power BI is the one that is taking most interest at the moment, mostly I think because it's Microsoft. So it's a really useful tool to be able to work with individuals there. So those are the kind of languages that tend to work in.
Hello. So do you actually use any performance matrices in order to like judge your results or your outcomes, or it just be studied in like Python, Java?
So I use a tool called To Do to log my time. So basically I will be looking at how much time I'm spending on various things, and then we've got a CRM that looks at what revenue is being put in, so there is part of me that's looking at the financial side of things and the productivity side of things. Data Understood needs to get a lot better at actually capturing customer feedback. So recently I actually had 2 MBA students from this university working with me to try and help me with that, because I knew that it was an issue that we needed to have. So they spoke to my customers and got customer feedback, which was really, really helpful. I am singing the University of Glasgow's praises because they've been exceptionally useful to me. But yes, we want to get better indication on that. I also have a very close colleague whose whole background is in environmental science and in sustainability and scalability stuff. So she is encouraging me to start looking at environmental outcomes. But that one's a really tricky one to look at. It's going to be a difficult one to actually formalise that, but those are the kind of metrics that we try and look at. Yeah.
I have one more question if I can.
Yeah.
How do you guys communicate with each other? Like, do you follow Agile or Jira, or like you just talk to each other?
So internally we use Microsoft Teams. It's become the norm, unfortunately, fortunately. That's, data understood is completely remote. We don't have an office. But I've yet to really see the need for having an office. I realise that this is a very...
a lot of capital cost.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm Scottish. No, that's... Sorry.
Unless you're based in India, right? Within ourselves we'll use Teams and try and project manage our way via using like lists, etc. We tend to adopt what our customers use. So if our customers want to manage us using a Jira backlog, we'll totally adapt to using that Jira backlog. But one of the things that I think is important, especially for all of the people that are starting the business, do whatever your customer wants within reason, so adapt to their needs. Yep.
A couple of questions. First, how would you advise an entrepreneur or basically anyone on when to trust the data and when to be just stupidly confident? You get a gut feel, and it's very, very difficult to explain what that is. I had a statistician working for me, and it was actually when I was working for Insights. He'd done an algorithm, and he came to me and he went, "Inez, I think I've proven that astronomy is real." And I went, "No, you haven't."
Sorry, astrology.
Sorry, astrology.
No, wait, is astronomy real?
Astronomy is real. Astrology. And I went, "No, you haven't. You've got an error in your data." And I said that in the most biased way possible, but he did go back and went, "You know what, I have got an error in here." He hadn't accounted for weather. And he was looking at a mostly northern hemisphere sample. So there was two things that were at fault. He had a biased sample, and he hadn't got all the confounding variables that could potentially account for this. So there is a gut thing that will tell you, "I don't think this data's right," and then you need to explore why it's not right. But it's difficult to explain what that is.
So how do you advise your clients in such particular instances maybe?
So my customers have the best gut instinct about their customers. So if they think something's wrong, I'll listen to them and try and figure out why that's wrong. So just as I said to Fergus, "There's something wrong here," there will be occasions where they'll tell that to me, and then we'll break it down and figure out where that's potentially coming from. And if I can't find out where that's coming from, then it becomes a much easier way to communicate to the customer that maybe they're wrong. But you have to go through all the possibilities effectively.
The reason I asked was basically, I read this somewhere, data is like a prisoner. If you badger data enough, it will confess to anything.
But it comes down to make sure you have a non-biased sample, and make sure that you're asking it the right question. But yeah, the lies, damn lies, and statistics phrase hasn't gone that far yet. That's
My second question was for people like me who do not have any programming background or coding skills, but the ages of data. How can we get started on maybe just learning about data, applications that might be relevant to us?
The easiest thing is to speak to someone like myself who does have access of data. We can help. That's it.
I think following up on his question, I think data would always look complex if there is not right human intervention, as you just mentioned before, when we were talking about AI and stuff.
Yeah.
So I personally feel that the presentation should look like as simple as possible for your stakeholders to understand. Data would anyway look complex because data is complex. It's just what matters is how simple is the human intervention and how simply that human is conveying that data, translating that data.
Totally. I lost out on a contract because I was being asked to represent data for a car dealership company. I put forward a a pitch, and I lost it because the end users wanted to have their sales figures represented as little car images, and if I'd known, like, there was part of me that was like, oh my word, I could have done that. But it's exactly what you're saying. Being able to see things in a mechanism that makes sense to the individual is really key.
So did you end up having a pie chart in the shape of a car?
No, because they didn't take us forward. It was like, oh my word. Yeah. Next
you
time.
go back to him then with your simplified version?
No, so unfortunately, it was months later that I found out why, and it was just like, wow, that's annoying. but it's exactly what you're saying. Sometimes graphs and charts are not a good way of communicating data. Yeah, you have to make it sing. Sorry.
I wonder how you get feedbacks on your customer based on the service you offer, since it's not a product, and then how would you use those information and feedback to improve the solution you're offering to the customers?
Easiest way is by talking to your customers, or getting someone else to talk to them, because occasionally it's difficult for a customer to tell you directly that you've done a bad job. Having someone in between to be the middle person to take that is useful. And trying to, especially if you're a small business and you're in the service industry, having that strong relationship is important so that they can tell you when they're not happy. So when I'm running workshops, I consciously highlight an area that says what's not working well, what is working well, what can we improve, and making sure that they feel safe enough to communicate that to you. It's a difficult thing, but it requires relationship building.
I mean, they still can be happy, but they don't know like which way you can improve your solution. In other case, they will come to you. So it's not like a product that say, okay, the battery life cycle is not long or enough.
Yeah.
So how would they understand how can you improve the solution that you offer to them?
So I think it's partly based on how much value they're actually getting from you. So whilst they might not have dealt with data consultancy before, they've probably dealt with other businesses, and they will know whether or not your solution is actually helping them do their job in the way that they wanted you to help them. So if I'm employed to speed something up, they should see in effect that they are able to speed up their business process. If that doesn't happen, then they know that I'm providing a bad service. So you have to know exactly what your customer's outcome is and make sure that you're affecting that positively. Also keeping an eye on what your competitors are doing, and making sure that if they're providing a better service, then how do we learn from them? One of the MBA students that was working for us talked about a concept called parallel play, which I absolutely love. I had not heard of this concept before. When you are a small business and you're trying to evolve, work with your competitors and learn from them, just as children learn from other children about how to do things in a more advanced way. So that's how we're trying to improve our service. We're not going to get it right first time, but hopefully eventually we'll learn what makes it better further down the line.
What's your advice to people in terms of kind of trying to overcome the chicken and egg scenario of getting your first customer when you found a business?
That's a really difficult question. I didn't start my business, so I'd been working as a freelancer for 2 years before I founded Data Understood, and I founded Data Understood when I got the customer it was a contract that I knew I could survive a year on. But I had been working, it was a side gig that I'd been doing whilst working full time, because I'm very, very risk averse. So that was why I kind of had this, if I find the right customer, then I can bet the house on trying to make this work, and fortunately it's worked out okay so far, touch wood. But I don't know how you do it any other way, because I'm the most risk averse person in the world. That's we're all good?
Marcia?
Oh, sorry.
You mentioned before about getting up there, trying different things, trying lots of things, and getting a mentor. So have you ever had a mentor ever mentored yourself to someone else?
So yes and yes. So I've had mentors. Basically, when I started working for organisations, you inevitably form bonds, and inadvertently they become your mentors because you're going to be asking them questions, asking them for help. But as you become more established, so I have a business coach that is helping me because I know that I can't provide all the answers. So finding someone that you respect, someone that you trust to assist you is really, really helpful. But basically, work with people and ask for help. And if it's not working for either of you, then move on to the next person. You're going to find someone that hopefully helps you. That's
Any last questions, guys? Jing?
So I know that you have a lot of clients and you deal with their data, but like, do they just give you the data and process it, or do you also need to gather the data for them? And how you like normally gather data, like build your data set?
most of the time we don't do data gathering. It is they've got data and we collect it from them. We can support them in gathering data, but because the data is of interest to our customer has to be the data controller. So it's enabling them to collect information in the right way. So this can be supporting them from trying to figure out the process for collecting information and how that's appropriately stored. But right now it's very much